Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanianity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be.
Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 46, recorded on April 23rd, 2020. It is the third recorded conversation with Ben, a somewhat close acquaintance who has developed some interest in the concept of humanianity. We talked about the absence of an overall concept and feeling of importance of humanianity, even though many people all over the world are trying to make the world a better place, and how the degree to which individuals engage in this effort probably follows a bell-shaped curve which could be moved much further in the direction indicated by the Humanian Ultimate Ethical Principle. We also discussed the issue of the nature of the foundation for ethics, whether authoritarian, scientific, or arbitrary, and we talked about the relationship between science and the belief in God, such as whether there is any contradiction therein and why or why not. There were frequent technical interruptions, but with editing, the flow of the conversation was preserved pretty well. Hey.
How you doing, buddy?
Good. How you doing?
Just trying to be the most rational and ethical as possible.
Uh-huh. And that can be difficult.
It is difficult. Don't you think don't you think the world kind of works against you to one degree or another in trying to do that?
Well, I'm not sure about the way that you're saying it. I'm not sure that that's exactly how I would put it.
Or it's more challenging because of the way the world currently is.
No, I would say something much more general than that.
Okay.
So it's kind of like we have a little different orientation. It's not that yours is incorrect and mine is correct, but it's a different. We're looking at something slightly different. And in a slightly different way, I think.
Well, let me hear your perspective of it.
Trying to simplify it as much as possible, we are.
I'm trying to think exactly where we were at.
Yeah,
we were talking.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I think, we were along the line somewhere of people not really having too much focus or too much motivation to seek out, I guess, a more rational and ethical way of living or behaving.
Well, yeah, and what we were specifically talking about was the issue of religion, and you were saying religion is a throwback. Currently, there is in our Western culture an anti-religion kind of sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
It is more the thing now to criticize religion or make fun of it or whatever, unless one is indeed within one of the religions. But a different way of looking at that is that the religions have always been there as our effort to figure out how to be good people and so forth. And again, if we talk about how we as a species have been and how we are becoming, then of course our religions show that in their histories. So if we look at the history of any religion that began a long time ago, we will see how we were back then, and then at the, quote, progressive end of the religion. There will be people who have given up some of the outdated aspects of
But I think I caught most of what you were saying before about people about religion being an effort over throughout history for people to try to live better and come up with better rules and guidelines for living and so forth.
Yes, and our religions still are rather primitive because we human species are, and that's hard for us to believe because we are so modern with regard to our language and science and technology. But ethically, we are still, for instance, our most feared predator.
Oh yeah, by far.
Yeah. And
But
so
that would be that bottom part of the behavioral spectrum that causes most of that issue.
But then we can take a look at that and ask, well, why does that bottom part exist? And what is needed to move the bell-shaped curve, let's say, forward drastically to a far better way of life? What stands in the way?
That would be a multifaceted answer. That wouldn't be just one simple answer because
right.
You can't answer that with one. It's not possible to answer that like a lot of more complex problems or issues. You can't answer that with just one simple statement. But it's probably got to do with a broken. I guess the simplest answer would be a broken system. But there's many aspects of that broken system from all right. Yeah, I don't know where it got cut off at. I'll kind of try to start over. I was saying, your multiple aspects of that answer to that would, or like I was saying, the simplest answer would be a broken system, but then there's many layers to that. Well, maybe so. So then you could say a extremely suboptimal system to be more specific. I don't know about that. If you look around, unfortunately, our media doesn't pay a lot of attention to it. They like the more negative and dramatic aspects of things for whatever reason. That would be a whole other conversation. But there are a lot of good things going on and a lot of good people doing a lot of good work and doing a lot of good things. Yeah. So, I mean, there are a lot of people really trying hard to make the world a better place. So, I don't know if that statement would be entirely accurate. Oh, yeah. I mean, the one you made before about that we were, maybe a lot of people didn't really think about it that much or put that much thought or effort into it. Yeah, and that would be not at the bottom of the spectrum, but still kind of to go back to cable internet.
There it is. It's back again.
Trying to go back to where we were.
Well, we are both in agreement that lots of people are trying very hard to make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm.
And that we could say maybe that's a bell-shaped curve or some such curve,
Yeah.
That there are people at the opposite end who are trying to hack and destroy and and so forth.
That's right.
And then there are lots of people who are just trying to get by on a day-to-day basis and are not thinking about us working together as a species globally, and there are people that are primarily trying to go from one entertainment to another,
Yeah.
But the idea that working on one's ethics is the most important thing that we can do is not entertained by most people. Many people say, well, I've got my ethics straightened out, and it's, that there are a bunch of bad people in the world and so on. But the idea of advocating for and participating in something like the Humanianity Project uh, doesn't appear interesting to people in general. I would suspect that that is true for you, that you have not spent some part of your day working on the Humanianity concept.
I think you're back on now.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah, there it goes again.
so
No, I was saying I'm spending part of it right now.
yes, you are, but that would be unusual, and I would suspect that most of your days you don't think about it at all. And that's not saying anything against you. It is
Oh, I
talking
understand.
about that's the way we are currently. We don't have a sense of the importance of working on uh, this project as a species, meaning advocating for it and participating in something like the Humanian Belief Manual, where there's the sharing and comparing of basic ethical philosophies and so forth. So,
Yeah, I don't know if I would say I don't think about it specifically in as far as humanity specifically, but the concepts I would say for the better part embody, or at least try to. I'm not perfect, but I make a decent effort day to day to embody the concepts that would correlate or agree with humanity. So
well, yes, and I agree that for many people, indeed, they say, "Well, I try to be as ethical as I can," and so
so
forth.
would
But
wouldn't
that's but
that would be if they're trying to be as ethical as they can, that means there has to be thought and effort in that direction, and that pretty much is does that pretty much does go along with it, doesn't it?
uh, that's uh, that's always been true that people have their own specific individual ethics that they try to go along with and so forth, and they do listen at times to other people. That's always been true, but as far as the orientation toward us becoming better as a species by virtue of coming together and working on things together, no. And For some people, yes. And there are some things on the internet that are of that. Okay, so
I think we were talking about uh, people's focus and motivation or lack thereof to try to think and behave and live more ethically.
no, not uh, lots of people indeed do that, but then how they define ethically is different all over the world. To behave ethically in some places is to kill your daughter because your daughter has left your faith and so forth. So
Yeah.
they are highly ethical, but their ethics is different.
Well, yeah, but that would be like would that'd be like me as a fitness trainer telling everybody to make sure you sit around a whole bunch and eat a lot of donuts and sausage and biscuits and things.
Because you don't believe that. But
I know, because I know that suboptimal is why I don't believe it. But they don't have their brain is so afflicted, they don't have a concept of that being suboptimal.
I think that it that we throughout our history have all sorts of beliefs about what the right thing is to do. Um, in some societies, cannibalism is the right thing to do. The people that you sacrifice, then you eat, and so forth.
Yeah, the ancient tribes believed that if they would eat the defeated tribe, that they would take on their strength.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's pretty
So
crazy.
they were behaving highly ethically, but their ethics was different. Their ethical systems are different. Now, it's very easy for us to say, oh, well, if their ethics is not the same as mine, then they are just bad ethically. Uh, but each person is going to say the same thing with that orientation. But there's a different orientation. Instead of looking down upon the people who have ethics that are different, to recognize that the problem is that we as a species cannot come together as one species in behalf of us all. We are tribalistic. That's built into us. And so it is easy for us to smile and look down upon those those tribes that have different ethics than ours. But the Humanian ethics is defined at a high level, namely consistent with the Humanian Ultimate Ethical Principle, and based on a rational consistency with that as a part of a social contract by everyone for everyone.
Well, it's a probably more modernized, forward thinking, uh, refined ethics as it pertains to the betterment of humanity and the world. So it's like if you just say ethics, if the definition of ethics is subjective depending on the individual, like a guy I was talking to years ago said, the funny thing about ethics is, like, if you look at a wolf, a pack of wolves and a herd of sheep, and you examine each one's ethics, well, for for the pack of wolves, it's ethical to attack the sheep and eat one of them because they have to do that to survive. So it's ethical to them. It makes sense to them, and it's going to help them. But it's not good for the sheep. The sheep go through a horrific ordeal in that same instance. So it can be subjective to the individual or to the tribe, but I think a more forward thinking and enlightened mind will be able to come to an objective definition of ethics, in the ethics as it pertains to the well-being and progression of humanity in the world.
Well, see, here we have a problem with word usage, and the word that we're having trouble with is ethics. There is a tendency for us to use it in two different ways. One is ethics is um, that area of living that has to do with what we should and should not do. And it can be the study of that and the study of how we arrive at that and so forth. And then the other is whether we are good as defined by us. So we say, well, that person is not very ethical, when in fact, let's say the people who are flying into the World Trade Center were highly ethical. They were adhering to
Maybe subjectively, but as it pertains to well-being of humanity. No, they were not. So
but the well-being of, see, you're saying that there is an objective ethics, and that happens to coincide with your ethics. But this issue has to do with the philosophical question of what is the foundation of ethics, and that's a very tricky.
well, then you could say, yeah, it just boils down to the individual or the group's objective, to what they're attempting to accomplish or promote.
Okay, and so that is very often the ethics of the tribe. In other words, what our tribe considers to be the right thing to do, and the tribe next door that has different beliefs about the right thing to do, well, they're just the bad guys. They are, quote, not ethical, but they can be highly ethical.
But then you can look at an intelligent mind is going to look at that like, okay, what's going to have the better outcome? Who's living the best? Which group is thriving and progressing in the best way as it pertains to their well-being and their maximum amount of JCA and their minimum amount of PSDED. So look at each group. How well is each group doing based upon their way of living? And the method is very high correlation with the quality of method equaling the quality of the result.
Well, again, using what criterion? There are large numbers of people that believe that the optimal thing is indeed absolute obedience to a God that says kill the infidel, and so forth. So the question as to whether there is an absolute right answer to what is the right kind of ethics, what should we basically be trying to do, it is at least in dispute. Now, usually, I think there are three orientations to that. There are those who say the way you tell that the foundation for what is truly good and bad is whether it is consistent with what God wants, God being whoever or whatever is most powerful. So then there is the atheistic group that says no. See, the religious group then would say atheists then can't be moral. And
yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, atheists would say, yes, we can be moral ourselves, that it is objectively true that certain things are right and wrong, and that can be demonstrated scientifically. However, they don't demonstrate that. And then the third position is no, there is not an objective true ethics. It is just what we, whoever we is going to be, decide upon that we want. And then we say, well, if that's what we want, then what we should do is those things which will accomplish that to as great an extent as possible. And so that position is probably one that you would not be for. You would be for the scientific one that says, oh yes, that there is an absolute good and bad inherent in the universe, discoverables by science. However, that cannot be demonstrated.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that's still in a speculative and theoretical state currently. But that's one of the talking points I had actually made a note about. There is some speculative or kind of, you know, I'll get to that in a little bit. But um, back to what you were saying a second ago, like if you go back to like an example of it would be the Ten Commandments. You know, these were the instructions given to me about how we should live, and you know, overall, I mean, I think in the original text there's a couple questionable things, but if you simplify it and modernize it, it's overall a pretty good list of instructions. And if you look at our current laws and values, they correlate with that to a good degree. And I mean, you know, no religious person or atheist could argue that it's a pretty decent. It may not be perfect if you go back and study the original writings and everything, but it's a pretty decent list of instructions or rules because it keeps a lot of harm from happening and a lot of bad things from happening, so that our laws and customs and values are kind of structured around that has prevented a lot of bad things from happening and does control humanity and society to one degree or another, depending where you go, to not do as much harm and to behave in a more optimal way.
Well, there's not any. I don't have any disagreement that any list of ethical values, including the Ten Commandments, can be, to some extent, to maybe a great extent, desirable. I think, however, that the problem is that the question is, well, why is that? So, I mean, in other words, yes, you agree with, let's say, the Ten Commandments.
Mostly.
Okay. So, okay. But just the fact that you agree with them doesn't mean that they are correct. You can agree, you can believe a particular thing and it not be correct.
Yeah, but no, see, you're making it like where I'm maybe imposing my great power or wisdom upon the information itself, and it's completely not that. I agree with the the effects that it has been mostly beneficial, mostly optimal. If you look at the effects, the why it's so powerful is the origin and the psychology behind it, that it it was sent, it was set, it was told to by it goes back to your authoritarian ethics. It was told to by the most powerful, the most knowing, and the most powerful said, we should do these things and not do these things. So you have some, unfortunately, the way we're built and wired, it does have a lot more profound effect, a lot more effective effect when it comes that way. The psychology is very powerful when you say the most knowing and most powerful entity said we better and better not do these things. Even if that somehow wasn't true, the psychological aspect of it is very powerful.
So you're saying that the Ten Commandments would be true even if it were not something that was handed down by a deity, that it's something that we could agree upon.
For the most part, I think there's something. If you go back and read the original text, there's something in, I think, like the eighth one about don't covet somebody's manservant or something like that. Some minor avocation of slavery or something like that. So yeah, if you go back to the original text, you could probably pick a few things out of there that don't sound quite right, that don't sound completely optimal or rational, ethical. But over, don't steal, don't kill, the basic things like we shouldn't do to each other. I mean, all that's, there's really no argument for that. Even if you're an atheist, you could be like, well, yeah, we should probably still go by those rules.
Well, then it gets down to things. I mean, there are complicated issues like, therefore, we should not engage in punishing people by putting them to death, and so on, because that would be against. But the problem comes about again that whether you agree with it or not doesn't have to do with whether it is, quote, objectively true. That's the basic issue that we're dealing with here. Objectively true in that anybody and everybody using the appropriate criterion would agree with it. The problem is that that's not that is not so, or that now it's not clear to me whether you're saying that yes, it's whatever is handed down by whoever or whatever is most powerful, or whether you're saying that it is a truth that is just inherent in the universe, discoverable by the scientific method, let's say, or
oh, well, that would, I mean, you couldn't prove nor disprove that. There's no way to completely prove or disprove that idea. But the objective truth would be in the results of an idea. So
that has to do with whether one wants the results or not.
Well, yeah, okay. So then that goes back to one of my talking points I had written down about delusion. If someone's not, for whatever reason, willing to look at things in a objective way, in a accurate way as far as intelligence and facts go, then yeah, then maybe they're at a mental and psychological impasse. If they're not willing to look at things as they are with the best evidence to date. If you're not willing to look at things in that way, then maybe that's as far as you're going to go.
Well, they would say the same thing about you, right?
Yeah, but then I would present all the evidence of effective methodologies.
What the evidence consists of, in general.
Exactly. So, like one of my talking points, somewhat pertaining to that, I had written down was like you can scientifically justify why a person should live in a positive way, especially as it pertains to one's health and well-being. Is very scientifically justifiable. So, like when people have good conversations and communication, when people laugh, when people dance, when people have a good gathering, which is kind of hard right now, I guess, unless they do it like this Skype gathering. Probably still not as good as the real thing, but when people, when you do socially, when you behave in a socially positive and benevolent way, that releases endorphins in your brain. It makes you feel good. When you are angry and stressed and worrisome, that you very well know that builds cortisol. High amounts, continuous, that's your AKA stress hormone. Continuous high amounts of cortisol are worse for you than smoking and drinking are. That and obesity, that's the two worst things that can possibly be done to a human body that we currently know of. Unless you're like doing meth around the clock or something like that. But that's what I'm saying. Behaving in a positive way has a great benefit to every person. So there's a very strong and objective correlation with that. And if you look around, most of the happiest and people who are the most at peace behave in a positive and benevolent way.
Well, see, you and I agree about things like that. We are both within a similar ethical system. There would be another possible ultimate ethical principle, and that would be that we should do that which will promote the greatest diversity of species on this planet. And that would mean that we should exterminate one species, namely ourselves.
But it doesn't have to be that way. We have the knowledge right now, and we've had it for decades. We have the knowledge. We can turn the earth into a very wonderful place. We have the knowledge right now.
Yeah, but we don't. We as a species don't behave that way. Now, I agree that maybe we will get to behaving that way. All I'm saying is that there are other ethical positions that people can take that are right for them, wrong for us, and for us, we are right for each other, and those that believe differently are wrong. But as far as there being an objective one that can show who is right, that doesn't exist, other than if you make the assumption that, well, we are the ones that are right, so the way you tell is whether somebody agrees with us or not.
Well, then you're going back to the tribalistic and closed-minded way of looking at things, and then so whether things really make sense or truly rational or have a really good outcome or not, because the group thinks this way and talks this way, I'll go along with it because it feels a lot better to go along with the group or be accepted as part of the group and even revered as a higher ranking member of the group, versus having to stand up for what I truly think or truly believe in. So that goes back to that. But if one looks at things objectively and intelligently from an enlightened viewpoint, you look at it as you disconnect all connotations, and you look at things like, okay, what flat out has the best outcome? What has the best effect on humanity and the world?
Yeah, in our judgment.
Yeah, in our judgment. But a sound and healthy mind, especially one that,
as defined by us.
Yeah, can become pretty skillful at such a thing over time. Based upon, it's like anything. Like when you first start doing most things, even if you're genetically predispositions to maybe have a talent for that, or you're kind of built and wired to be good at that, you still will have to work at it and develop skills and refine those skills. And you could look at it like that. How does if one does, like you said, does take interest in becoming rational and ethical and seeking an objective truth and then manifesting that over time, you probably will become pretty skillful at that.
An objective truth, are we talking about ethical truth?
I mean, pretty much, because like I said, if you made an objective definition that the ethical truth was for what is overall best for humanity and the world. If we somehow all, like you said, probably won't happen, but if we all somehow agreed that that is what ethics, the definition of ethics was, that would be the case.
Yeah, well, again, ethics can refer to the general phenomenon,
Yeah,
or it can refer to my specific ethical system or your specific ethical system.
which is only as good as the evidence is based on. Is the if it's based on things that don't make much sense or don't have a very good outcome, then okay. It's like I say, it goes back to me as a fitness instructor telling everybody, well, you should do the donut diet, or you should do this sit around all day workout program. Well, okay, right away, neither of those sound very rational or ethical to you. But then if I can tell you the right way, the things that I've learned in 2 decades of being in the profession and studying in the profession, then I could present some very strong scientific data and evidence as to why, and I could show you examples as to why these methods have the best effect, and any belief system could be viewed that way. Okay, what are the outcomes of looking at having this perspective and behaving in a way that's based upon that.
Okay, so now are you familiar with the distinction between existential beliefs and ethical beliefs?
Yeah, I think we went over that in the last one. Yeah.
Well, could you say what it currently means to you?
Existential being what one experiences in their own life and existence, and then your ethics being your belief system, what you believe is right and wrong, or what you believe you should and shouldn't do.
Um, okay, so the existential belief. Can you say that again?
Based upon what you've experienced, learned to believe based on your existence. Like I believe that when the thermostat says 30 degrees and I go outside, it will feel cold. That would be an existential belief.
Okay.
I believe I believe I should help my neighbor that is in need of something. That would be an ethical belief.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
My understanding.
Yeah, well, I think you pretty much have it. Existential beliefs are beliefs about what exists or has existed or will exist in the future, possibly, and how it all works. And ethical beliefs are beliefs about what one should or should not do. And philosophers have talked about the difference between is and ought. That's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, now what about the relationship between the two?
I mean, I would think they should, to someone who is trying to be rational and ethical, they should kind of correlate. The two should intertwine, kind of like space and time.
Okay, yes, and I agree. I think we can be a little bit more specific about it. The concept that that is helpful in understanding it is the concept of legitimization of a belief. The legitimization of a belief is one's reason for believing it and for believing that others should also believe it. So, we talked about this in a previous.
The second one, yeah, the last one we did.
So you remember that there's, let's say we have whatever ethical belief this is. I say, I believe I should do such and such. And you ask, well, why should you do such and such? You're asking for me to legitimize it. And so the way that I do that is I go to a higher level, broader ethical belief, and then an existential belief that if I do this lower level ethically advocated for behavior, that I will be doing that which is consistent with the higher level ethical belief. So I use maybe an unfortunate example. I'm holding a gun on a man and I say, I should not pull this trigger. And so you ask, why should you not pull it? And so I go up to a higher level ethical belief, I should not kill that man. And then there's the existential belief, if I pull this trigger, I'm likely to kill that man. Therefore, I should not pull this trigger. And so then you can ask, well, why should you not kill that man? And I can go up higher. And so there's always reference to a higher level ethical belief that is broader, and then either an existential belief or a definition that shows why the lower level is an example of that, follows logically from it. And then that means that one ultimately gets to a highest level ethical principle, and that is not legitimized in that way because it is the highest level one. And so if it is not legitimized in that way, then it is arbitrary. It's what we want for whatever reasons we want it. And then we can develop an ethical system that is consistent with that ultimate ethical principle. And of course, the one that I advocate for is the Humanian Ultimate Ethical Principle, that we should do that which will promote not only the survival of our species, but also as much joy, contentment, and appreciation as possible, and as little pain, suffering, disability, and early death as possible for everyone now and in the future.
Yeah.
So if that's what we want, then we should do that which will promote that. And that's how that ethical system comes into being. It's because that's what we want to do. No different than if I've used the example, we're sitting around the table and we say, I propose that we all go to Carowinds. And everybody else says, yeah, that's right. Okay, well then we should do that which will promote our going to Carowinds. Then there would be things that you should do this, you should do that, you should do the other, because that's going to work out the best, and so forth. So Humanianity is the ethical system that has that as its ultimate ethical principle, and also has the belief in it that one should be rationally consistent with that, but that's only one. That is therefore an ethical system that is just decided upon because we want it, not because it's objectively true. It's because that's what we want. We want, and so when you're describing the fitness issues, if a person wants to live as long as possible and to be able to do as much as possible, then there would be certain things that would follow from that by virtue of our existential beliefs about what will happen if you eat donuts all day, and as opposed to something else. So,
But that might be something too that's kind of more obvious, whereas a lot of other things uh, might not be quite as obvious to see based upon lack of knowledge or delusional information or thoughts. So it would boil down to the quality of information and knowledge, and then the quality of action taken
yeah, yeah. So,
toward an objective.
right. Uh,
Yeah, but and then uh, with the whole authoritarian versus rational. And I know we kind of were talking about that toward the end of the last one. Uh, I don't, over time, authoritarian, uh, that which is most powerful have saved a lot of good things from a lot of bad things over time. So, I don't know if in the history of humanity if that'll ever become completely obsolete because of human nature and the less optimal aspects of human nature. There's probably a lot, or I'm just not probably, there's definitely a lot of bad things that haven't happened because of uh, basically fear of the outcome, fear of the result or the reaction. If someone does this bad thing, this suboptimal or negative thing, the fear of, I guess, what you would call the punishment. And yeah, a more enlightened or positive person is not going to really be motivated in that way. I don't really do what I do, or a lot of people don't really do what they do because they're so much fearful of not doing the right thing or doing something bad. But yeah, my motivation is rational and ethical, and it's not based upon what the authority figure will do to me if I don't do. But that, I think, in the world, that still has its place, because unfortunately everybody's not like you and me and a lot of the other people that think and try to think and behave in a rational and ethical way.
yeah. So again, when you use the word enlightened, you mean one of us, we who understand correctly, as opposed to the other people who don't. And
Pretty much, more, yeah, to a better degree. Yeah, I do mean that.
yeah, yeah, and that's what other people would say also, that you're not enlightened because you don't know what God really wants of you and so forth, or you're not enlightened because of this or that. In other words, enlightened means believing as I do, and unenlightened is that those people outside our tribe that we can look down upon and smile about.
Now, I think enlightenment is the. I think you're kind of coming up with your own definition for it, and I could look it up in the dictionary on the phone or whatever. But I think I'm using it more in a way to say, seeing things in the most possible objective and positive way, uh,
According to whom?
according to that which is going to have the best possible outcome.
Best according to whom?
Best according to the what's best for humanity and the world.
According to whom?
According to any person with a healthy brain, any person that cares to be that open-minded and that forward thinking, and they're willing to uh, put any archaic or irrational thoughts or beliefs away, and look at things in a objective and benevolent way.
So this, so where we seem to be at, the difference uh, is not in what you and I agree upon, uh, namely that we want the world to be a better place, i.e., less suffering, less early death, and so forth. We are in agreement with that, but it has to do with the issue of whether um, we are the right ones and the other people who don't agree with us are the wrong ones. And that's an objective sort of thing, that we happen to be objectively in the right position, when in fact there are other people who would say the same thing, that would say that we are misguided, that we are delusional, that we believe in scientism, or we don't.
Is that a thing?
Scientism?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's well, the use of things from science to make it seem like um, that what is being said must have the authenticity
Okay.
Acquired from science, when it isn't. It's just using scientific terminology and so forth. Uh, and But it also can refer to a derogatory view of science, that science is doesn't take into consideration, for instance, God. And
But actually, it does quite a bit. A lot of scientists, very accredited scientists, are looking into such things. Not so much talking snakes and pregnant virgins, not that kind of stuff, but like uh, forces that we don't know about yet. Things about our brains and the universe that we don't know about yet. There's a lot of studies and research going on in that area.
uh, in the area of the existence of a God that is outside of and in control of the processes of the universe, I don't think you'll find that much in scientific endeavors.
Well, yeah, and I think maybe you're kind of like closing in on the label, like you're trying to label it as the wizard on the cloud, or the the all powerful Oz. I guess you're familiar with the movie. You're trying to like make it like whatever it is, like it's this certain thing, and then it's like the more ridiculous you can make it sound, the more you can discredit it. But if you look at it as a possibility, and something to be examined rationally and logically, then it becomes a lot more viewable and researchable versus, yeah, okay. Yes, yeah, it's probably not a big bearded man sitting up in the clouds up there throwing down halos and lightning bolts. If you say that, yeah, then of course you make it sound pretty preposterous. But if you look at it from a rational standpoint, and back to what you were saying about, like, so it's not correct to say I think this and I'm right, so all the other people think this. They're incorrect, because then you're adding ego into it. It's like, so when I say I think something, I don't really think it at all, because then that's adding ego into it. And ego is just a delusion of self, of superiority or insuperiority. That's just a delusion a lot of us have in our brains. I'm talking about just accurate observation of the world and everything in it. So it's like, okay, I see to current date, this is what has the best effect and the best outcome. To current date, this is what the most accurate, the best information is. This is where the most evidence is to up until August 23rd of 2020. Okay, so that's what I'm going with to this point, because that's what has the best outcome. So just like when we fly a rocket to the moon, we have a pretty darn good formula for how to do that, and it had to be worked up to over decades, in order to do that. And it's anything, so you wouldn't go back and say, oh no, the best way to get to the moon is in a canoe, or the best way to get to the moon is in a Cadillac. You wouldn't say that. The best way to get to the moon is in one. But then, in 100 years from now and 1,000 years from now, we'll probably have a lot better ways to get to the moon. We might just have some little space pod that'll just shoot you there, So especially in thousands of years from now, we'll probably have it colonized and everything else. But so it all goes. It's not that I say I'm not a Svengali, it's not, or a guru. It's not that I say this, therefore it must be so. It's 0% that. It's these are the current facts about this. Therefore, we know to this point, this is the best way to go about achieving a result or an outcome based upon the best information we currently have.
Okay. Well, I think we started this particular subtopic having to do with, if I understand correctly, whether whether the existence of a God was something that is going to be consistent with the sciences, the natural sciences.
We'll look at it this way. What if, because we'll definitely agree on all science is doing is decoding everything. It's all science is doing is figuring everything out. So we know creation happened. The debate is there a creator or force of creation? But we know it happened. We're here. So science is just from back when the caveman started mapping the skies and making tools, and that was science and technology in its infancy. Up from, so all sciences is figuring everything out. So if I would think if God created all this, science is just figuring out what God, or whatever you want to call it, it's just figuring out what it created, what it put here. So that's all it's doing. So I don't see why to me there is no confliction whatsoever, because the two things are one and the same. And like I said, the little bit of evidence I have, is that the more positive you think and behave and live, the better things go. There's a strong correlation with that. So it's either by design, which I tend to lean that way, or it's a fantastic cosmic coincidence.
Yeah, well, some of this, some of the uncertainty with regard to our agreement, or even what we mean, again, has to do with word usage. You're using the phrase figuring things out. We can be much more specific and precise than that, I think. and that has to do with what science is actually trying to do. And I'm talking about basically the natural sciences, which is what you were talking about also. Uh, can go beyond that, but the the idea is that what science attempts to do is to create a model of reality such that with that model you can predict what's going to happen or what's going to happen if you do this, that, or the other, and that if the model does enable that prediction highly consistently, then the model is considered to be accurate. So, so what happens is that the way the sciences do that is they engage in measurement, and measurement results in certain results that either are binary, yes or no, or are scalar, that can be assigned a number, and then develops equations that show how those things work. In other words, if you know this and you know this and you know this, then you can predict what that will be. And if the prediction always comes true, then it is completely accurate. Although we can never know for sure that there's not going to be an exception and so forth. But accuracy, the degree of accuracy, is the degree of probability that the prediction will be accurate. So at any rate, so the scientific models are just mathematical models that allow you to predict the results of measurements.
Yeah, I'm pretty aware of all that.
Now, what you're saying is that that there probably was a designer that designed that, but the scientific models are not dealing with that issue at all. So they're not dealing with the issue of whether there is an ultimate creator or not. Now, on the other hand, if we were to say that this entity, God, actually caused things to happen outside of the models that science uses for prediction, then that would show up in the data that showed that you could not accurately predict because there was an entity who was, depending upon his or her mood, interfering with or.
No, that's not fair because now you're projecting human traits onto it.
Okay, so no, I understand that. So, so the concept of a God that is watching you and is changing things for you is indeed inconsistent with the scientific procedure of the development of models that predict.
Maybe so, but then maybe, I mean, because scientific models 50 and 100 and 200 years ago were not the same as they are now. So who's to say what they'll be measuring and recognizing in hundreds and thousands of years from now?
Yes, but those changes are not just arbitrary flip-flops or changes to something else. It is a more precise and accurate extension or elaboration of what was understood before. So Newtonian physics is still accurate within a certain range. But then relativity and so forth, it goes beyond that and says why Newtonian physics will work within a certain range of
It keeps expanding and evolving from Newton to Planck to Einstein to Hawkins. It's always expand and evolve.
You're right, right. And so that's not the same thing as, oh well, science believed one thing and now it believes something else. So it's just a flip flopping kind of.
Well, no, it'd be more of a compilation from the beginning. Like I said, it goes back to when the cavemen first started mapping the skies and building weapons and tools from rocks and branches and cooking their meat with fire. That was the earliest. That was the earliest scientists there. They were experimenting and collecting knowledge, and it goes from then till today, and it keeps evolving and expanding. Like I said, but like if you look at the Higgs, fairly recently discovered the Higgs boson. Look at what did they choose to name it? What's their name? What's their nickname for it? They could have picked anything.
The God particle?
Yeah, they could have picked anything. They could have called it the jelly bean particle, or they could have called it the creation particle. That would have been a lot more scientifically acceptable, But no, why did they pick to call it that? Because there is still a seeking and a interest in that aspect of things, and they think it's the particle responsible for energy mass conversion, but and Einstein, pretty much revolutionized the idea that the matter and energy were still one and the two sides of the coin. So that's the thing, for 13.8 billion years. It's all has been is a continuous exchange of energy, and that's all we are right now. We're just at this very moment of the energy. Everything's constantly just energy exchanging and taking different forms. That's all it is, but it's all energy.
Yeah, the concept of energy, I think, is an interesting sort of thing.
Well, yeah, and people can misuse the word. They could like any term. You can take it and make it mean or have whatever connotations you want. But I'm using the objective definition of energy, or the word in its objective meaning. But there's, like I said, maybe not at this point conclusive data, but there's a lot of I'd say speculative and there's enough there to say, well, okay, you got to look at this. There's enough data, and I'll send you some examples. There's enough data, and if people have a certain emotional or psychological, here's the thing: people have emotional and psychological agendas on both sides. Very very religious people are cling very firmly to their beliefs and their things, and they don't want to relinquish that or alter that because of the way it makes them feel. And atheists are very much like religious people and behaviorally in a lot of ways, in that they're kind of stuck on their way of looking at things too. They can be just as closed-minded, if not more, than the religious people, because they want to, so for whatever reason, I'm sure that they have different psychological and emotional reasons, want to believe that there is nothing. We're just a bunch of evolved primates running around doing what we do, but to me, it's like scientifically, you can't go. It makes almost just as little sense to see things that way when there's enough there to at least, okay, maybe, yeah, you don't have any conclusive evidence at this point, but there's enough stuff going on there where you at least have to examine it as a possibility. For, like there's a lot of people who are really good people, really good people. We should kind of have the definition of that clear at this point. And do a lot of things, sacrificing a lot of themselves. And personally, primally, they stand nothing to gain by doing these things. Yet something still motivates them, something still compels them to do these things that are greatly benevolent and beneficial to others in the world. But personally, and on from a primal standpoint, they benefit in no way from doing these things.
Well, I'm not sure that is really that could be said to be true. They, I believe that they get great personal satisfaction out of doing what they believe is something that is beneficial and helpful.
And a lot of these people are not religious people, so they're not really doing it because the wizard on the cloud, is giving them the big thumbs up. They're doing it just because something within them compels them to behave this way, to live and be this way. So that's between that and how much better off an individual is by living in a positive and rational and benevolent way. Like I said, it's either there's either something there, there's either something to it, or it's a really fantastic cosmic coincidence. It's just a really we kind of won the cosmic dice game on that one.
Well, I think it is more understandable than that. And it has a lot to do with child rearing uh, from the very beginnings of one's life. Uh, uh, from then on, because we are surrounded by other people, mother at first, and parents, and maybe siblings also, the family, and then the wider group outside of that, and so forth. And we get from these cultures that we are always embedded in, we have certain behaviors that are reinforced, responded to in a positive way, or in some negative way, are negatively reinforced. And so we, from the very beginning, in the first year of life, are being shaped by those experiences. And that's why child rearing is so important, because there are some kinds of child rearing that produce people who are highly oppositional and angry at the world and so forth, and have some need for revenge, and who have some need to bully others as they feel bullied themselves and so forth, compared with others where there's been relative absence of punishment and positive reward for doing that which is helpful to other people. And so such individuals are going to feel that motivation to always make things better within whatever culture one is within. And so let's see, how did we get down this road here?
Oh, you were talking about child rearing via, I guess, a main origin of the human condition. I guess you could say.
Yeah,
like a lot of our ailments and ills coming from suboptimal child rearing. Yeah, I guess in closing, I just wanted to say one more thing about like I've been saying to people lately, being it April 23rd of 2020, to let people know what time we're having this discussion in the midst of the COVID-19 virus outbreak. Mm-hmm. You know that this virus has pulled back the curtain on a lot of society's issues nationally and globally, and a lot of human issues. It's pulled back the curtain. It's exposed a lot of things that I already knew, and I think a lot of people already had sight of, and the concept of, you know, the inequality of wealth and the suboptimal behavior, the inaccuracy of belief of facts and what's optimal. For example, the protests that are going on in the various cities around America, that people want to, and I understand that you would want to go back to, everybody wants to go back to work and back to the park and and everybody wants to get back to living and doing the things they either need to do or want to do. Of course, that's without saying, but when you protest to do these things, you know, in an unsafe way, not so much putting yourself at risk, but when you're putting others' lives at risk because of your own selfish and thoughtless desires and wants, then that's a real problem. Like I said, human behavior is kind of, and ignorance is kind of on display. It's being exposed, and also the inequality of wealth. If it's because people were already so close to the edge financially anyway, that if you're living paycheck to paycheck, then all of a sudden you go without a few paychecks, you're in a really bad situation. But these multimillionaires and billionaires, they're not suffering too bad right now. Maybe their stocks will go down a little bit, but they're really not suffering, which a lot of people are suffering because of suboptimal beliefs and suboptimal human behavior. So like I said, this coronavirus thing we're dealing with this last month or month and a half is pulling back the curtain on all that. It pertains to a lot of what we talked about ethics and rationality and accuracy of belief, and what your level of thoughts or thoughtlessness, how it affects your world and your fellow man. So it hopefully more good than bad's going to come out of it.
Yeah. Okay. And I discovered what the problem was when I restarted my computer. I needed to unplug my earphones and plug them back in. When I just did that, and that corrected the problem. But unfortunately, I'm going to have a lot of work to do. Okay, so...
well, I guess if you want something to keep you busy.
Yeah. Okay, well, so let's...
Do you have any closing remarks? Do you have anything you'd like to cap it off with?
That I do appreciate your doing these sessions with me. I always appreciate being challenged with regard to whatever it is that I believe. It helps me to think more deeply and so forth. We seem to still have some differences, and that means that we've got the opportunity of exploring those and benefiting from that discussion, those discussions. So I hope that you have a good continuing time here in this bad time of coronavirus and so forth, and that everything goes well for you and your family.
You too, buddy. You stay safe and keep being positive and optimal, and we'll get through it. We'll be back at it before you know it.
Yeah, hopefully so. Take care.
You too, Doc.
Bye-bye.